The chamber was electric, humming with the tension of a storm about to break. Rows of cameras lined the back wall, their red recording lights blinking like warning signals. In the center of it all sat Judge Edith Jones, her robe draped like armor, eyes narrowed to a razor's edge. Across from her, Representative Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her posture straight as steel. In that silence, everyone could feel the weight of history pressing down. Judge Jones leaned forward, her voice slicing through the air. "Representative Crockett," she began, tone dipped in disdain, "your attitude here is unbecoming of someone in your position." Gasps rippled through the room. It wasn't just what she said, it was the loaded way she said it, as if decades of hierarchy and prejudice had just slipped out in one sentence. Crockett's expression didn't flicker, but the cameras caught the faint tightening at the corner of her mouth. Reporters in the back scribbled furiously. On Twitter, phones already glowed with furious thumbs. "Did she just say that?" someone whispered, barely loud enough to hear. The phrase, "your attitude," echoed like a dog whistle, feeding centuries of coded language. And yet, Jasmine Crockett did not rise, did not speak. Her composure radiated a quiet power, a dignity that seemed to grow stronger the more the judge tried to shrink her. The contrast between the two women was stark, one leaning forward, eyes glittering with challenge, the other sitting upright, radiating calm in the eye of the storm. This wasn't just a procedural hearing anymore. It was a flashpoint in the long-running battle over who gets to speak, who gets to lead, and whose dignity must be defended in the halls of power. Every person in that room, every viewer at home, could sense something monumental building. The air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation, like the moment before a gavel strikes or a thunderclap splits the sky. And then, just as the room drew in a collective breath, the tension sharpened to a single, invisible point, a point about to explode. But no one expected what would unfold just minutes later.
Outside the chamber, the story was already mutating into something bigger. Within seconds of Judge Jones's pointed remark, clips of the exchange were flooding Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram Reels. Headlines blared in all caps, "Judge clashes with Rep. Crockett over attitude." Hashtags erupted. Hashtag stand with Crockett. Hashtag power in poise. Hashtag attitudegate. Each one a digital rallying cry. Cable pundits broke into regular programming to replay the footage, looping the moment like a slow-motion car crash. What might have been a procedural exchange was now a national spectacle, a mirror for America's deepest tensions. For millions of viewers, it wasn't just about a judge and a representative. It was about something older, larger, and more combustible. It was about the coded ways power polices confidence. It was about the quiet bias embedded in who gets labeled angry, unprofessional, or unfit. And it was about the refusal of those on the receiving end to be diminished. In one room, two figures embodied a struggle that echoed across dinner tables, classrooms, and offices nationwide. As the clip went viral, the reaction split along familiar lines. Some commentators defended Judge Jones's comment as plain-spoken and tough, but far more voices heard the sharp undertone and called it out. Young activists live-streamed their responses, recounting their own experiences with authority figures who used words like attitude as a leash. Civil rights leaders tweeted solidarity. Immigrant advocacy groups framed it as yet another example of dignity under siege in institutions of power. Everywhere, people were interpreting, projecting, choosing sides. This wasn't just social media chatter. It was a collective reckoning. Viewers weren't simply watching two women in a hearing. They were watching a cultural crossroads in real time. The question loomed large. Would dignity or disdain define the moment? Back inside the chamber, that awareness seeped into the air. Everyone present knew the cameras weren't neutral observers. They were amplifiers, megaphones, battlegrounds for narrative control. And Jasmine Crockett knew it too. Every flicker of her expression, every stillness of her hands became a form of message discipline. Each breath she took under scrutiny was a subtle assertion of her right to be there, her refusal to bow. Meanwhile, Judge Jones seemed to double down, leaning on her reputation for being blunt and uncompromising. But outside those walls, bluntness no longer read as strength. It read as a spectacle, as a relic of an era when authority went unchallenged. The tide of public perception was shifting, even as the hearing unfolded, and no one in that room could fully control it. The confrontation was no longer just about a moment of disrespect. It was about America's ongoing debate over power, identity, and representation. Each retweet, each reaction video, each incredulous headline raised the stakes higher. This was not a single exchange, but a storyline rewriting itself in real time. And the audience, vast and invisible, was judging both women with every heartbeat. And as the buzz grew louder, another layer emerged. Commentators began speculating. Was this the moment Jasmine Crockett would rise from rising star to national figure? Would this clip define Judge Jones's legacy? The very future of their public images hung in the balance, a duel fought both in a courtroom and in the cloud of digital opinion. In that volatile mix of power, race, and public perception, nothing was stable. A single remark could topple reputations. A single act of composure could launch a movement. Every second ticked like a countdown to something larger, something that would make even this dramatic clash feel like a prelude. Yet the deeper you look, the more explosive this clash becomes.
Long before the cameras converged on that tense chamber, Judge Edith Jones had carved out a reputation as a figure who relished the hard edge of authority. Over decades on the bench, she projected an image of steely certainty, a judge who claimed to see through excuses and sentiment. Yet behind that reputation lay a trail of controversial decisions and remarks that critics said revealed something more troubling, an instinct to punch down, to lecture rather than listen, to treat power as a weapon rather than a responsibility. In legal circles, Jones was famous for her withering tone. Attorneys whispered about appearing before her, knowing that a single misplaced word could draw a public scolding. Supporters framed this as tough but fair, but detractors noted the unevenness, how often her harshest rebukes landed on women, minorities, and advocates for the powerless. Over time, the pattern grew harder to ignore. When journalists stitched together her public statements, a portrait emerged of a jurist who seemed convinced of her own infallibility and who appeared to delight in puncturing others' dignity. One episode that resurfaces again and again in profiles of Jones involved a lecture she gave at a law school a decade ago. Instead of a neutral analysis, she launched into a scathing critique of identity politics and soft sentencing, warning students that emotions have no place in justice. The remarks drew applause from a few, but for many they landed as an attack on anyone who had lived at the sharp end of bias. It wasn't just the content, but the tone. Dismissive, rolling her eyes, making offhand jokes about advocates playing the victim. Those who were there still recall the tension in the room, the way young students of color stared at the floor, unwilling to make eye contact as she spoke. Her defenders insist she is simply frank. But time and again, that frankness seemed to tilt into contempt. When confronted about disparities in sentencing, she would retort with phrases like, "Facts don't care about feelings." When challenged on systemic bias, she would say, "The law is blind," even as statistics showed otherwise. Each remark reinforced the sense of a judge less interested in understanding than in dominating the conversation. And yet, Jones cultivated an aura of intellectual superiority. She gave interviews about her love of classical music, her discipline in daily life, her belief that order must be imposed on chaos. To her admirers, these were marks of refinement. To her critics, They looked like the trappings of a patrician worldview, a woman perched high above, peering down at the people whose lives she shaped with a stroke of her pen. What made this moment with Jasmine Crockett so combustible was how clearly it fit the pattern. Here again was Jones, in full view of cameras, leaning into the language of hierarchy, your attitude, spoken not as a neutral observation, but as a verdict, a dismissal, an assertion of dominance. For many watching, it felt like the culmination of years of unexamined bias erupting in a single sentence. Social media users began digging up old speeches, past rulings, half-forgotten controversies, weaving them into a narrative of a woman out of step with the America of 2025. Even mainstream outlets began to echo the frame. Headlines shifted from tough judge to embattled judge. Op-eds called her a relic of an old guard. Commentators asked whether her tone would have been the same had the representative been older, white, or male. In the span of hours, Jones had become not just a participant in a hearing, but a symbol of a larger struggle. And for someone so steeped in authority, that was perhaps the most dangerous position of all. Yet for all the criticism, Jones projected unshakable confidence. She did not issue clarifications or apologies. She doubled down, sending out a statement about maintaining decorum and respect for the rule of law. But the phrasing backfired. Instead of quelling the backlash, it fanned it, as pundits highlighted how decorum and respect were often used historically to silence dissenters and uphold exclusionary norms. Far from calming the storm, her words confirmed the public's sense of a judge who saw herself above reproach. As the backlash intensified, something else happened. Former clerks, lawyers, and journalists began sharing anecdotes that had been whispered about for years. Stories of her impatience with interpreters, her brusque treatment of public defenders, her refusal to acknowledge bias in jury selection. Each anecdote layered on to the next until the image of Judge Edith Jones was no longer of a neutral arbiter, but of a career-long antagonist to the very principles she claimed to uphold. What had once been an aura of discipline now looked like a mask for disdain. This is the dramatic tension of the moment. A powerful jurist, steeped in tradition and convinced of her own righteousness, now facing a reckoning in the full glare of public scrutiny. The audience, progressive and identity pride-driven, can feel the irony. For decades, Jones had the power to define the narrative. Now, the narrative is defining her. In cinematic terms, she is the villain whose habits and hubris are finally catching up. The antagonist whose power play has triggered her own undoing. And yet, as the outrage crested, few noticed another force quietly gathering on the horizon, a force not of bluster, but of calm preparation, empathy, and resolve. But while her critics fumed, another figure was quietly preparing.
Jasmine Crockett's story begins far from the gilded halls of power, in neighborhoods where resilience was a daily necessity. Born to parents who had immigrated in pursuit of opportunity, she learned early that dignity wasn't something granted, it was something claimed through effort, sacrifice, and the quiet insistence on being seen as human. Her childhood was shaped by stories of struggle and triumph, tales of long nights, second jobs, and classrooms where expectations were low, but dreams had to soar. She carried those lessons with her, a steady flame that would illuminate her path even in the darkest rooms. School became the first proving ground. Crockett excelled academically, not just to achieve personal success, but to honor her parents' sacrifices. She faced microaggressions, outright prejudice, and teachers who underestimated her abilities. Yet every setback was met with calm determination. She learned to listen before responding, to observe before acting, to temper frustration with strategy. By the time she graduated high school, she wasn't just a top student. She was a model of quiet strength, someone whose presence commanded respect without ever demanding it. Her peers admired her, sometimes silently, often taking cues from the poise she exuded in every interaction. College brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. Crockett pursued political science and law, fields notoriously dominated by voices louder and more entitled than hers. There she encountered debates that mirrored society's deepest divides on race, on gender, on the meaning of justice. In every argument, she remained composed, dissecting points with precision and exposing assumptions without ever resorting to insult. It was during this time that the foundation of her reputation began to take shape, the reputation of a woman unflinching in her pursuit of truth, of justice, and of dignity under fire. Her early legal career further cemented that reputation. Representing clients often dismissed or marginalized, she became known for meticulous preparation and a calm, unwavering voice in courtrooms that could intimidate even seasoned opponents. Every case carried a moral weight, and she treated each with the gravity it deserved. Colleagues would later describe her as someone who never allowed fear to dictate her performance, someone whose ethics and empathy were as rigorous as her legal acumen. Crockett's work wasn't about showmanship. It was about substance, about standing for those who might otherwise be invisible in a system stacked against them. Public service became her natural extension. Entering politics was never a quest for fame, but a continuation of the work she had been doing for decades, amplifying marginalized voices, challenging inequity, and proving that leadership could coexist with compassion. Campaign trails were grueling, often littered with personal attacks designed to test resolve, yet Crockett consistently responded with dignity, turning criticism into opportunity, highlighting systemic issues rather than retaliating, focusing on solutions rather than grudges. Her speeches resonated with people who had experienced similar struggles, who recognized in her an authenticity that transcended politics as usual. Social media buzzed not with scandal, but with admiration, constituents celebrating a representative who refused to be cowed, who met arrogance with steadfastness, who embodied the possibility that courage and composure could coexist. By the time she stepped into the hearing that fateful day, Crockett had accumulated years of experience navigating scrutiny, bias, and expectation. She carried not just her own history, but the hopes of communities who had long been told their voices didn't matter. Every step she took, every carefully chosen word reflected that legacy. Yet it was her calm under direct challenge, her ability to radiate confidence without arrogance, that truly set her apart. In a room filled with power and history, she became a living symbol that dignity and intellect could stand firm even when the weight of authority pressed down. Her life story, rich with struggle and triumph, had prepared her for this confrontation in ways that were almost cinematic in their inevitability. While Judge Jones leaned into hierarchy and spectacle, Crockett relied on patience, discipline, and an unshakable moral compass. In that contrast lay the essence of heroism, not a dramatic flourish or an overt display of power, but the quiet, resolute refusal to be diminished. Every lesson she had learned, from childhood resilience to courtroom mastery to public service, converged in a single steady thread: the belief that one's worth is inherent and that dignity is not negotiable. Even among colleagues and constituents, whispers began to circulate that Crockett was not just another politician. She was the kind of figure whose presence in a hearing could silence cynics, whose preparation could disarm the most confident adversary, whose patience could turn arrogance into self-exposure. Every anecdote of her upbringing, every recounting of her early challenges added layers to the story. She was not born into privilege, yet she navigated power with a grace that demanded attention. She was not immune to bias, yet she wielded it as motivation rather than armor. The deeper people looked, the more evident it became that Crockett's composure was not passive. It was strategic, moral, and profoundly inspiring. And so, as the cameras focused once more on the chamber, as the room's tension seemed to tighten around them like a drumbeat, The stage was fully set. The hero's foundation was laid. The audience, progressive, immigrant-friendly, identity pride-driven, could feel it. This was a figure worth rooting for, a force of dignity about to meet the storm of arrogance head-on. Her history, her struggles, her unwavering commitment to justice, all of it poised for a defining moment that would be remembered long after the chamber emptied. All of this would converge in a single electric moment.
The chamber seemed to shrink as the tension thickened, each heartbeat amplified by the hum of cameras and the faint rustle of papers. Judge Edith Jones's eyes narrowed, her gaze fixed on Jasmine Crockett, as though willing her to falter. She leaned forward, voice low but cutting. "Representative Crockett, it seems you still do not understand the decorum required in this room." The words were deliberate, each syllable a jab, and they carried the weights of authority wielded like a weapon. Crockett's hands remained folded, but the smallest flicker of tension crossed her face, an almost imperceptible tightening around the jaw. She inhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch before answering. Her voice, when it finally came, was steady, measured. "Judge Jones, I believe respect is shown through adherence to the law, not through intimidation." A murmur ran through the gallery. The calmness of her reply contrasted sharply with the sharpness of the judge's attack. Jones's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. "Intimidation?" she echoed, leaning closer. "No, Representative, this is a lesson in accountability, something you might benefit from learning." There was laughter, low but unmistakable, from a few observers, a ripple that made the chamber feel colder, more divided. The words were designed to provoke, to unsettle, to expose weakness. Yet Crockett held firm, though her eyes betrayed the effort. Each point she made was precise, legalistic, deliberate, as if each word was a shield against the barrage. "I am accountable," she said, her voice unwavering. "I am accountable to the constituents I serve, to the oath I took, and to the principles that guide this chamber. And I will not allow personal judgment to cloud the application of justice." The contrast was cinematic. The villain towering, aggressive, preying on perceived weakness. The hero calm, poised, unwavering, a study in restrained strength. Jones's hand tapped against the bench, a staccato punctuation to the growing tension. "Your words may sound polished, but attitude cannot be measured in sentences alone. I suggest you reconsider how you present yourself in this room, or face the consequences." The escalation was deliberate, public, and chilling. Each phrase seemed calculated to provoke a crack in Crockett's composure, to reveal any hint of doubt or frustration. Audience members leaned forward, some whispering, some frozen. Phones recorded, capturing every subtle shift in expression. Social media feeds lit up, hashtags climbing, hashtag dignity versus arrogance, hashtag Crockett calm, hashtag attitude attack. Analysts dissected every gesture, commentators debated every tone, and the nation seemed to hold its collective breath. Crockett's hands remained folded, but the smallest flicker of tension crossed her face, an almost imperceptible tightening around the jaw. She inhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch before answering. Her voice, when it finally came, was steady, measured. "Judge Jones, I believe respect is shown through adherence to the law, not through intimidation." Her words struck with precision, deflecting the verbal assaults while reinforcing her moral authority. Every sentence chipped away at the veneer of dominance Jones had tried to project, even as the judge pressed harder, attempting to assert control with each sharpened remark. The room vibrated with anticipation. Each exchange was a duel, a psychological battle played out in real time. Observers sensed it. This was more than a hearing. It was a collision of principles, a test of resolve under fire. The tension rose like a drawn bow, each word a taut string vibrating with potential energy. And then, just as the standoff seemed to reach its peak, a subtle shift occurred. Crockett's eyes met Jones with quiet intensity, a spark of calculated resolve that promised more than just measured responses. The room sensed it, the cameras captured it. The social media feeds anticipated it. Something monumental was about to unfold. And then came the counterattack that would shake the room.
The room fell into a tense silence, as if the air itself had been pressed flat under the weight of expectation. Judge Jones leaned forward once more, ready to punctuate her dominance with another calculated remark. But Jasmine Crockett did not respond immediately. She sat perfectly still, eyes steady, hands resting lightly on the table before her. Every camera in the chamber focused on her, capturing the slightest movement, the subtlest intake of breath. In that pregnant pause, the audience felt the gravity of the moment. A storm was about to break, and it would not take the form anyone expected. Finally, Crockett's voice emerged, calm but charged with quiet authority. "Judge Jones," she began, each word deliberate, resonating in the suddenly hushed room. "You have made judgments about my character, about my attitude, without considering the principles I serve or the oath I uphold. I am accountable to the people, to justice, and to the very law we both swore to honor." The cadence was steady, measured, but carried an unmistakable force that drew the attention of every observer. Her calmness itself became a weapon, a challenge to the spectacle Jones had constructed. For a heartbeat, the room was suspended. Then murmurs broke out, reporters exchanging incredulous glances, colleagues leaning forward, some with mouths half open in awe. The pause before her next words was cinematic, a heartbeat stretched into eternity. "Authority," she continued, "does not grant permission to diminish others. Power does not justify condescension, and respect," she emphasized, her eyes sweeping the chamber, "is earned through fairness, integrity, and the courage to serve, not through intimidation or the misuse of titles." Judge Jones's composure, so carefully cultivated over decades, faltered imperceptibly. A flicker of doubt crossed her eyes, almost too fast to register, but the cameras caught it. The subtle tightening of her lips, the brief glance downward, the cracks in her armor were beginning to show. Crockett's calm had become a mirror, reflecting everything Jones had projected, leaving the judge exposed, unshielded, vulnerable. The chamber seemed to hold its breath as Crockett pressed on. "I stand here," she said, her voice unwavering, "because I believe that public service is not a pedestal to assert superiority, but a responsibility to those whose voices are too often ignored. And if anyone believes that a single word, a single moment of criticism can define me or those I represent, they are mistaken." She paused, letting the weight of her declaration sink into the room. Every eye tracked her, every ear strained for nuance, every mind recognizing the shift in power. The effect was instantaneous. Gasps rippled through the audience, some audible, some caught in the tightened throats of onlookers. Phones buzzed, capturing video, live streaming every syllable. On social media, the hashtags erupted. Hashtag justice, hashtag dignity under fire, hashtag Crockett calm. Influencers and ordinary viewers alike flooded feeds with admiration, awe, and solidarity. Tweets appeared in real time. "This is how you handle bias without losing your dignity." Crockett just dismantled years of condescension in one calm statement. Watching history in real time. The digital applause was deafening, a chorus amplifying the emotional resonance of the chamber itself. Jones tried to recover, attempting a retort, but her words came clipped, uneven, lacking the precision that had been her trademark. The weight of Crockett's measured, strategic delivery left no space for theatrics, no room for domination. Each attempt at interruption or assertion only highlighted the contrast, the hero composed, grounded, commanding respect, the villain flailing, defensive, stripped of pretense. The imbalance was almost painful to witness, a visual and auditory testament to the power of poise over projection. Crockett's rebuttal evolved into a rhythm that was both legalistic and profoundly human. She cited principles of fairness, referenced precedents, and wove them seamlessly into a narrative that underscored her point. Authority is not a license for condescension.
Her pauses were intentional, cinematic beats that allowed each point to land, each revelation to resonate. Every inhalation of the audience, every scribble of a reporter's pen, every subtle nod in the gallery added to the tableau. This was not a mere argument, but a masterclass in dignity under pressure. The chamber itself seemed to respond. A few spectators shifted in their seats, leaning in closer. Some exchanged quiet whispers of disbelief. Even those predisposed to side with Jones felt the momentum tilting, the moral clarity of Crockett's stance impossible to ignore. The visual contrast, the judge leaning, tense, impatient, and the representative upright, calm, resolute, became emblematic of a deeper truth. Arrogance falters in the face of preparation, and intimidation cannot overpower principle. As Crockett continued, she transitioned into the emotional heart of her defense. She spoke of communities often overlooked, of constituents whose voices were dismissed, of young people watching from home learning that courage is not about volume but about conviction. "We are all accountable," she said, "not just for our actions, but for the way we treat one another. Respect is not optional. It is the foundation of justice." The words resonated like a bell, reverberating far beyond the chamber's walls, carrying both an indictment and an invitation, a call to acknowledge dignity in the face of hubris. By the time she concluded, the chamber had shifted entirely. The air was charged, electric, vibrating with the impact of her words. Judge Jones's hands rested limply on the bench, her attempts to reassert dominance neutralized by the calm, unassailable authority Crockett had displayed. The reporter's fingers flew across keyboards, capturing quotes, reactions, and the palpable sense that something historic had just occurred. The hashtags climbed relentlessly, trending not for scandal, but for excellence, for composure, for moral clarity. Hashtag dignity wins, hashtag Crockett versus Jones, hashtag respect under fire. The moment stretched, cinematic in its intensity, every gaze locked, every heartbeat synchronized to the rhythm of Crockett's measured power. For the audience at home, it wasn't mere political theater, it was catharsis. Years of watching competence dismissed, of witnessing arrogance go unchecked, were crystallized into this instant, a woman standing calm, unshaken, and victorious without raising a voice, without stooping to insult. And as the chamber slowly exhaled, as whispers, gasps, and murmurs began to ripple outward, one truth became undeniable. Authority is fragile when confronted with dignity, and intimidation cannot survive the steady force of principle. Cameras, social media, and human memory alike captured the defining tableau, a hero resolute, a villain unraveling, and a nation watching in awe. But the aftershocks of that moment went far beyond the hearing.
The hearing ended, but the reverberations had only just begun. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm, unflinching rebuttal were circulating across social media, spreading like wildfire. Each pause, each measured word, each subtle glance became a highlight reel of dignity under pressure. Hashtags trended nationally. Hashtag dignity wins. Hashtag Crockett versus Jones. Hashtag justice in action. Memes and reaction videos appeared almost simultaneously, a testament to the instantaneous power of the digital age. Ordinary viewers were calling it a masterclass in composure, and online commentary was unanimous in one thing: this was not just a political hearing, it was a cultural moment. News outlets scrambled to contextualize the event. Morning shows replayed the footage, dissecting Crockett's performance, with analysts weighing in on the legal, ethical, and symbolic significance. Headlines appeared in every major outlet. Representative Crockett stands firm against judicial intimidation. Dignity trumps arrogance in historic hearing. A lesson in leadership, composure, and courage. Even those who typically avoided political spectacle paused to watch. Editors described it as a turning point,
an instance where one person's steadfastness made the nation reconsider what true authority and respect look like. Celebrities and public figures began weighing in, lending both amplification and moral validation. Tweets from influential artists and writers praised Crockett for her calm courage. One musician remarked, "This is how leaders behave. Teach your kids to watch this, not just the sound bites." Activists posted threads analyzing the legal implications while simultaneously celebrating the broader social significance. The story was no longer confined to Washington, D.C. It had gone global, becoming a symbol of the fight against intimidation, bias, and the misuse of power. Even politicians who normally stayed silent on intra-branch disputes felt compelled to comment. Progressive senators and representatives praised Crockett's poise, framing it as an example of leadership that prioritized ethics and empathy over spectacle. Some conservatives begrudgingly acknowledged the effectiveness of her delivery, noting that even in political conflict, certain qualities, intelligence, composure, and moral clarity are undeniable. Across the spectrum, one truth emerged. This was a defining moment, one that would be dissected, debated, and remembered. Social media amplified the narrative further. Twitter and Instagram threads highlighted the contrast between the two figures, the judge's flustered gestures versus Crockett's unshakable posture, the judge's clipped words versus Crockett's precise, principled statements. Fans shared GIFs, short clips, and commentary, turning the exchange into a kind of real-time civics lesson. Teachers began posting about showing the clip in classrooms as an example of handling bias and authority with grace. Community groups framed it as inspiration, a visual manifesto for anyone who had ever faced condescension or systemic injustice. In political circles, the impact was immediate. Staffers, campaign advisors, and policymakers saw the shift in public perception. Crockett's credibility, once confined to her district and niche media attention, now resonated nationally. Analysts spoke of momentum surges and reputation elevation, acknowledging that one measured rebuttal had altered the trajectory of public conversation. The optics were undeniable. A young representative, grounded in principle, had outshone decades of entrenched authority simply by embodying dignity, patience, and unwavering focus. Culturally, the moment took on layers beyond politics. For immigrants, people of color, and anyone accustomed to navigating spaces stacked against them, Crockett's performance became symbolic of broader struggles. She represented the triumph of moral clarity over intimidation, of preparation and courage over inherited power. Commentators framed it as a moral victory as much as a political one, a reminder that integrity could not only survive but dominate in moments of high-stakes conflict. The narrative reinforced an essential lesson. Arrogance can provoke, but it cannot sustain itself against steady principles and quiet authority.
In the wake of the viral hearing, the story of Jasmine Crockett versus Judge Edith Jones took on a significance far beyond politics. It became a parable, a lens through which Americans could examine the ideals of fairness, courage, and dignity. The confrontation, once confined to a single courtroom, transformed into a mirror reflecting the values we aspire to uphold. Justice tempered with empathy, power wielded responsibly, and integrity standing firm even under scrutiny. For viewers, the moment crystallized a simple truth. Courage is not loud, and victory is not measured by dominance, but by adherence to principle. Crockett's calm rebuttal demonstrated that standing up for what is right does not require aggression. Her victory was not a personal triumph over one individual. It was a symbolic assertion that justice should be blind to ego, that authority is strengthened, not diminished, when it is exercised with humility and fairness. In this sense, her moment became a teaching moment for a nation still grappling with the tension between hierarchy and equality, privilege and opportunity, legacy and progress. For immigrant communities, for young people, for anyone who has been dismissed or underestimated, Crockett's example resonated on a deeply personal level. She embodied the power of preparation, the discipline of restraint, and the courage to confront intimidation without sacrificing composure. Every detail, the steady tone, the measured pauses, the unwavering gaze, became a visual affirmation that dignity is a force in itself, capable of dismantling arrogance without retaliation. Social media reactions, classrooms, and community conversations all reflected this sentiment. The audience was not simply witnessing history, they were internalizing a lesson about self-respect and collective responsibility. This story also reminded the nation of the fragility of unchecked power. Jones's crumbling composure highlighted the limitations of authority divorced from empathy. Her decades-long habit of projecting superiority met a force she had not anticipated: quiet, unwavering moral clarity. In cinematic terms, the villain's downfall was not violent or chaotic. It was inevitable, unfolding as the natural consequence of hubris confronting principle. For viewers, the lesson was both dramatic and deeply satisfying. Integrity outlasts intimidation, and the measure of leadership lies in restraint and respect. Beyond the spectacle, the hearing reaffirmed foundational American ideals. It was a moment that transcended party lines and personal agendas, speaking instead to a collective understanding that fairness and courage define public life. It inspired reflection on what it means to serve others, to listen before judging, and to act in accordance with a higher standard. The story of Crockett and Jones, while intensely personal, became universal, a narrative of accountability, dignity, and the enduring value of principled action. For those watching, the takeaway was transformative. It wasn't just about one representative or one judge. It was about a vision of society in which courage meets opportunity, where ethical leadership is rewarded, and where the marginalized can assert their worth without fear. The drama of the hearing, the clash of personalities, the viral sensation, all of it converged into a singular moral truth. When we act with integrity, when we stand firm in the face of intimidation, we not only change the immediate circumstances, but also influence the broader culture. As the dust settled, the lesson resonated beyond the courtroom and beyond the headlines. It was a reminder that moments of confrontation, no matter how tense or polarizing, can illuminate the best of human character. Crockett's poise, courage, and steadfast adherence to principle became a blueprint for how individuals, and indeed a nation, can navigate challenges while upholding the values that bind us together. Her story reaffirmed faith in the possibility of justice, fairness, and respect as enduring pillars of society. Before we close, there's one last message you need to hear.
The moment had come full circle. From the tense courtroom where Judge Edith Jones delivered her pointed remarks to Jasmine Crockett's poised, unflinching response, we had witnessed more than a confrontation. We had witnessed a testament to courage, dignity, and the power of principled action. Judge Edith Jones spoke about Jasmine Crockett's attitude, the headline read. But what unfolded went far beyond mere words. It became a story of resilience under pressure, a reminder that integrity and moral clarity are forces that cannot be shaken by arrogance or intimidation. For everyone watching, there is a lesson to carry forward. Standing up for truth and justice is not always loud, it is not always immediate, but it is always transformative. Crockett's calm defiance, her unwavering commitment to fairness, reminds us that the values we hold, dignity, empathy, courage, matter in every room, every discussion, every decision. It is a call to action for all of us to recognize our own power,
to confront injustice wherever it appears, and to remain steadfast in the face of challenges. This isn't just a story to watch once and forget. It is a story to share, to discuss, and to let inspire action. Your voice matters. Your engagement matters. When you amplify moments of courage and dignity, you help shape the narrative of a society that values integrity over arrogance, principle over posturing. If this story resonated, subscribe to stay connected to more accounts of courage in the public sphere. Share this video with your friends, your communities, your networks, and join the conversation about the power of standing firm under fire. Every view, every comment, every share is part of the ripple effect, a reminder that when truth and dignity prevail, we all rise together. The story of Jasmine Crockett is not over, and neither is the work of upholding justice. Stand tall, speak clearly, and let your actions echo.